it's basically trying to look at the idea of how models of architecture education have evolved over the years and then have reached to the current discourse of transformative pedagogy. It's not coming from a vacuum, transformative pedagogy. So I have a long presentation, which is about 45, 50 slides. So I will skip a lot of slides, and hopefully there will be room to share the slides and share the content of the presentation, but I will try to stick to the time as much as I can. So as you can see, it's all about pedagogy, transformative pedagogy, trying to move beyond conventionality, beyond traditional models that were inherited from the past or from past models. And these models, while they were really very successful at their time, they are not capable now of solving environmental, social problems. For example, the old Bauhaus, the Beaux-Arts model, the Polytechnics model, and many other models that were generated as a result of the Industrial Revolution and before that. But I will start with this contextualization. Ken Robinson. Ken Robinson is or was a British also consultant to education, to many governments in education matters, not necessarily architecture education and even pre-university education. And he was arguing that every country on earth is trying to reform education. We are in a continuous process of reforming education, and that's for two reasons. One cultural and one economic. Basically, we're trying to graduate future generations to position themselves and develop a sense of cultural identity in the context of a global order. And at the same time, economical, because we're trying to address the economic circumstances of architecture education and of education in general, knowing that really the economic circumstances are evolving continuously. So how do we educate future generations within this kind of paradigm? But the problem that he was trying to portray is that most universities and governments and institutions are trying to reform education by doing what they have done in the past. The current university model is simply developed during the intellectual enlightenment of the 17th century. So the university that we see today is an outcome of what has taken place during the 17th century and later evolved a little bit into the other forms of institutions during the Industrial Revolution. So basically, the current education system follows the traditions, norms, practices that were developed 200 years ago. Which leads us to really try to look at mechanistic pedagogy and systemic pedagogy, trying to look at differences between the way education was treated in the old paradigm and the way education is treated now. So these are some fundamental differences. Basically, now we are trying to see education as part of society, as part of a process, much of which takes place within society. Although in the past, education was treated within the university boundaries, within the university campus environment, and was exclusive to specific segments of society, which of course could generate loads of discussions about equality, diversity, inclusion, but it's not the topic now. The old paradigm also focuses on showing and telling modes of communication between the students and the teachers. The new paradigm relates, or the systemic pedagogy relates to the idea of transformative pedagogy, critical pedagogy, which I will try to offer definitions of, and also the concept, the hidden curriculum concept, which is really the reason or the backbone of these kinds of pedagogy. And I'm going to mention a few words about it. So we have this idea of mechanistic pedagogy and systemic pedagogy. Mechanistic pedagogy doesn't recognize that learning takes place differently among individuals. For example, some subjects are best learned by one teaching to oneself. Okay, you don't need a teacher for these kind of subjects. Some subjects are best learned by teaching them to others. Some skills are best learned through demonstration, instruction, through engagement and collaboration. So not all learning takes place the same way. Another important issue as part of contextualization, which is really very critical, because we cannot talk about education and learning in isolation from practice. So if we look at how architecture education has supported specific models of practice throughout the past 200 years, it supported the egoist architect, the pragmatist architect, and the technical assistant giver architect. And those are models that we can see them in practice every day. But being an advocate of a specific community, being a facilitator of the problems or solving the problems of a specific group within society or a specific community is always taking a backseat in the education system. So if you try to map your curriculum now on how your curriculum develop these kind of attitudes or develop these role models, you will find that in most cases, the egoist, pragmatist, technical assistant givers are occupying high importance within any curriculum in a school of architecture, in a modern school of architecture. The facilitator, the advocate roles are taking a backseat. And of course, we can go through the definitions of these, but they have attitudes. These role models have attitudes. The egoist says, I give the people what I want. The pragmatist, I give the people what they want. The technical assistant giver, I give the people what I can. But when we look at the facilitator and the advocate, they are different role models. Really, it's not about giving a solution to a community. It's about creating a process through which a specific community can solve their own problems. There is no doubt that the expertise of the architect or of the designer will remain central in this process, but people having a voice over the future of their built environment is critical in these roles. But why do we talk about transformative learning? That's an important question. We talk about transformative learning because old learning and old pedagogy has not managed to solve all of these problems that we can see. What are these problems? Okay, there is a complexity in the structure of contemporary societies, rising needs of diverse populations, special populations, and those with special needs, children, women, underrepresented populations. We don't talk about them in a mainstream curriculum. Deterioration of the built heritage. We give that in specialized courses, but not in the mainstream curriculum. Squatter settlements, informal housing. All of these are challenges. The global condition and the loss of identity in many places around the world. The urban sprawl. Natural disasters and displacement of communities. The nature-culture dualism and the nature and the built dualism. The rising need of post-industrial cities. The harsh reality, and you can see here that image, basically, which juxtaposes affluent community at the interface of a squatter settlement in Chile. So all of these are important issues. The current education system did not solve any of these issues. Now, there are many attempts that we try to address these issues and try to relate to them in one way or another. But still, they don't occupy the mainstream pedagogy. And this tells us that there is a significant need for multiple types of knowledge. Okay, and you can see this diagram trying to articulate different knowledge typologies that relate to these kind of problems. And the diagram is endless. You can add many axes depending on the type of problem. Whenever we find a problem, a new problem, in a new context, it becomes a knowledge typology that we are to address in our curriculum. Another important issue, really, as part of our contextualization is transdisciplinarity, and this relates heavily to transformative pedagogy, because transformative pedagogy recognizes that the fact that knowledge is not exclusive to architects and designers. People have knowledge. All civilizations have been developed without architects as we know them today, until probably the emergence of the Beaux-Arts and the formal architecture education. Before formal architecture education was established, all civilizations have evolved, that we already know them. Whatever emerged in the Renaissance, for example, there was no architecture school that generated all what we see as an outcome of the Renaissance or of other forms of civilizations before that. So this is a recognition that there are different types of knowledge, and these types of knowledge emerge from different types of disciplines. If we use contemporary language, like if we use sociology, psychology, anthropology, architecture, technology, environment, ecology, all of these aspects that contribute to solving problems. But before that, also, the folk knowledge, the layman knowledge, the scientific knowledge, the academic knowledge, and the mainstream people knowledge need also to be integrated in a process, and transformative learning can accommodate that. In 2009, I wrote a book about transformative pedagogy, and that was like 15 years ago. And then in 2020, I was asked to update the book, and I did minor updates to that book, and it became part of Routledge Revival series. So if you look here at the definitions, it's all about, I'm not going to read the definitions, but it's all about actions and responsibilities. It's all about interaction process during the creation of an object or an environment within the learning setting, if we talk about transformative pedagogy, but also within practice, if we talk about transformative practice. So transformative pedagogy is about an interactional process and dialogue between educators and students. So it's not about one-way information, it's about a dialogue. So, and many people call this dialogic learning. But also transformative pedagogy builds on critical pedagogy. So transformative pedagogy is like an umbrella for a number of types of learning and types of pedagogies. Some of them are called authentic learning, for example, inquiry-based learning, community-based learning. All of these are under transformative pedagogy. But the key one would be here, critical pedagogy. And critical pedagogy, it's about knowledge and power. So how do we look at the traditional student-teacher relationship and reconfigure that into a mode of collaboration and engagement, trying to question and challenge domination and beliefs and practices that dominate. These are really very important. It's also about shifts from passive listeners to active learners. That's an important quality of transformative learning and critical learning. From knowledge consumers to knowledge producers. The typical idea of exposing students to architecture magazines, okay, to use, to do precedent analysis and all of that is okay, is useful, but this is about knowledge consumption. You're consuming knowledge that already exists. But transformative learning, which involves working with communities in real-life projects, not in hypothetical projects, solving real problems, all of these aspects are about knowledge production more than knowledge consumption. This is basically the story of architecture education, and I will try to summarize the story of architecture education. You can see here that there were three dominant schools that occupied the scene of architecture education probably until the 60s. From 1666 and the emergence of the Beaux-Arts academies and art academies in France, the Beaux-Arts, the Bauhaus, and the Vicatums in Russia. And those three schools had different influences throughout the world. Some countries and some universities took them and adapted them to their own context. And they resulted in what I call the canonic tradition. Okay, the canonic tradition or the legacy model. That's the legacy model inherited from the past. We tried to adapt it and adopt it. But then in the 60s, there was heavy criticism with the emergence of social housing problems, the right to the city ideas and all of that, the civil rights era in America. All of these generated heavy criticism against that legacy model. So there have been attempts since probably late 60s until 2000s. And we can see that in the body of knowledge in the Journal of Architecture Education and in many journals, but they were individual attempts, not a school structure or a school ethos. So they tried to promote ideas related to critical pedagogy, hidden curriculum, transformative learning. But again, they have not seen a general application. Then we moved into different variations, community-based design learning, design-build projects, life-build projects, and all of these were important pedagogies that were introduced. From the 60s, they are not new, but we think they are new, but they were introduced in the 60s. Now they are more visible in the discourse of architecture pedagogy. Then we find ourselves facing a transitional model, which is the COVID, which had implications, different forms of implications on architecture education. It's not the subject for discussion today, but it's an important moment in the history of architecture education that we need to recognize. And I think it gives and offers opportunities to shape the future of pedagogy because it was a pause to certain practices that were happening in the past. And that moment was a good moment for reflection on how architecture education should look like in the future. We can see these are the three traditional models. I'll go quicker a bit. Then I looked at the analysis of traditional models trying to structure the studio experiences in terms of content, process, and teaching style, and what the criticism has generated with respect to these areas, and then verified that criticism with a number of surveys, attitude surveys, on how architecture educators see the academic practice and the pedagogy or design pedagogy. I'll skip this one. So these are some form of resistant models that emerged in the 60s and 70s in different parts of the world. And these are some of their characteristics. And they were beginnings of transformative learning, whether to focus on the process, whether to create inquiry and research as part of a studio environment, basically a dramatic departure from the Bauhaus, Beaux-Arts, Vicatemus models, or the legacy model. These are some of the characteristics of these models, and which ended up with different modes of communication. And we started to think of, okay, how dialogue can be created in a studio environment. The idea of one-to-one versus one-to-many, one-to-small group, one-to-a wider group, all of these aspects were important as part of transformative learning. And we can see here the resistant typologies involved these three models, which I would classify under the idea of the social construction model of pedagogy. Transformative pedagogy is part of it, which is all about reciprocity, the community and the designers. The community and the designers here means the students. It's about dialogue, it's about give and take, basically, negotiation, and then engaging with research, but seeing that process as a research in action process or action research process. So this was during the past 20 years. With that, there were many concepts that are used interchangeably, critical inquiry, process-based learning, and the emergence of digital technology were important components as part of this. And we can see different aspects of transformative learning. It's not just about engaging with communities. It's about departing the old model, departing the legacy model. Some of it is about learning by making, life build, design build, which ranges from small-scale design exercises in the beginning years to actual performances, for example, and theatrical performances. Political activism, all of these aspects are important components. Paperless learning, again, is a departure from the old model and an angle of transformative learning. Integrated design, process-based learning, the same. Now, the idea of assuming that everything should happen in a studio is problematic, because we do other things also in classrooms, theory, history, technology, environment, all of these aspects. So how to really embed transformative learning in classroom settings that are non-studio based? So here are some of the exercises that I used to give to my students, basically trying to engage with the reality, but instead of taking them outside, bring the reality to the classroom, and then we debate that reality through small-scale exercises that engage 2 people, 3 people working and solving or defining issues related to culture, environment, recognition of building types, watching videos and analyzing these videos and writing essays about them. And all of these videos have a social component. And that social component is basically about solving a specific community issue. Gaming, design gaming, all of these aspects evolved into a number of publications in the form of books and in the form of journal papers, special issues, and different really contributions. And again, when we look at this, we can start to see new aspects. The idea of the hidden curriculum, which is a concept that refers to those unstated values that stem from the relationships between teachers and students. Basically, the undocumented curriculum. So we always have a brief, have a syllabus, have objectives, have all of that. But we don't write anything about the relationships, about the protocol of engagement, about all of these aspects. And this is why it's called the hidden curriculum. With that, embracing transdisciplinarity, embracing decolonization, embracing the everyday, all of these are important qualities. Our latest work is finally about decolonization, trying to decolonize knowledge and say there are different forms of knowledge that emerge or that have emerged in different parts of the world in parallel to what was happening in Europe. And these forms of knowledge are equally important. We should not suppress them. We should recognize them and integrate them, whether in the West or in the East. So it's not about East-West. It's about the legitimate importance of different forms of knowledge. So this is an important question. Probably I will stop here. I have more slides, but I will stop here. Yes. I just want to say one thing, which is basically what got us here is not going to get us anywhere. So we have to really start to think of transformative learning. I was quite pleased last year to see the new European Bauhaus initiative focusing on community development, talking a totally different language that we used to see in the mainstream Bauhaus, basically. So this is a new era. This is a representation of a new era that can help in developing a resilient future. So thank you very much.